All right, we're in a different change of scenery. Welcome to Kai Dragon Gardening and Cooking, where, well, we went to a different place today. This is the area that was untouched ground, and kind of had a lot of experiments here. We've got a little bit of cucumbers still trying to grow. Some of the plants didn't do too hot, but that was from the cold snap, but they're still trying to grow. And we've got some incredible watermelons still growing. I mean, I just had to move a watermelon plant. Let's make sure I'm not stepping on it. So, yeah, Anne's got some tips she wanted to talk about for something. I have no idea what she was planning. She was surprising me. So, let's give her the floor and see what she wants to say.
Okay, we're going to talk about some tips for outdoor gardeners, and I think this will be fun for you guys because you can use your imagination and you can start planning for next year. First thing you want to do is choose the right plants. What do you have to say about some of the choices with some of the plants?
I think choosing the right plants is the most important thing you can do. Based on your geographical location, they have a great guide on where your zones are to help determine if the plant's right for you. But there's a caveat with that. If you have a heat wave, you have unprecedented temperatures, those zones will change or tweak just a little bit. They don't usually change them in the guides, but for example, where we were at in the Midwest, we had numerous weeks of 100-degree weather. We didn't really have a spring this year. We went from light heat to bam, right in your face, like the Kool-Aid man jumping through a wall going, oh yeah! So part of the problem with that is you are going to have stuff go to seed in panic mode because it's not supposed to do that. So you can't get discouraged with that. With that said, I feel like there's a lot of crops now that you have to kind of notice the pattern. Like I have learned broccoli does not do well in my garden because of the way the heat is. You could put broccoli in as a fall crop when the temperatures are dropping because every plant has a sudden temperature threshold, an internal clock built into them. If it gets too hot, the sun is just being down on them, or just the air temperature and the soil temperature is too hot, even no matter if you mulch, so let's just establish that even if you mulch, that's not enough, and there's nothing you can do about that. They will bolt and go to seed. Shade cloth helps reduce that, but you have to be cognizant that maybe broccoli is not really designed for your area, even though it says it is, for the spring. Now fall, you could probably get away with it, which I think we'll do some broccoli this fall to experiment with it, because typically it's one of those cool crops. Lettuce, kale handles anything though. Kale is great. Spinach is another one that is typically a cool weather crop, but I've seen it grow during the summer. Green beans, not so much. If you didn't get green beans in like around August, I would say don't try at this point, but planning is everything. So like next year, we are gonna figure out what we're gonna do in this area. We're gonna plan it out, and we're just gonna kind of mark it off. So probably closer to December at this rate, because we have to have it ready by end of December. So this is one thing to consider when you're gardening, is plan ahead. You need to plan ahead because you got to get your plants started indoors, or be ready to spend some money possibly at the nursery, greenhouse, or get the seeds in. So there's different things you can do. We have done everything. I am not sponsored by Red Dirt, but Red Dirt has been a great nursery that I would definitely love to tour, and hopefully at some point maybe we can get a brand deal with Red Dirt or something, because I'd love to go to the Oklahoma region to tour their massive nursery where they sell all sorts of stuff. So back to the planting thing, know what works for you, and if this is your first year starting out, research all the zones. Be prepared that your cool crops may not go well. The other thing you can do is stay outside and monitor where your sunlight hits throughout the day. Mark and make notes in your notebook, journal, something to see where the sun will come down on throughout the day. So for example, in my region or my area, I have no trees, so I get the full western exposure of the sun all day. That's why we had to do shade cloth. So I would consider where you're going to plant and how you're going to plant. Some things say full sun, they still can't take the full western sun all day long. They need a reprieve, so that's where the shade cloth and other things come into play. So kind of be mindful of where you're planting and what you want to plant. For me, tomatoes is always one that I always plant every year. Determinate and indeterminate, because there's so many really good varieties. Roma is great for canning. I'm always sold on Roma for that. Basil, mix that in with your tomatoes. Spinach is another one that I've always enjoyed. Kale, which I didn't really do kale this year, which we just ran out of room. Squash and zucchini. That one is a tough one because you've got vine borers in your region, and even some of the best gardeners struggle with that. There's different ways you can try to mess with them, but know that you're probably going to be planting throughout the season, pulling plants, having new ones in, and you got to try to figure out what the best vine borer breeding season is, because that's when you're going to get wrecked. Behind us we have zucchini and squash still growing because we've had an extended season. We even got nice little produce starting, so we've beat the vine borers this time, knock on wood. But what, there's wood right there, knock on it. Because their last breeding season was in August, so hopefully we're done with that situation. Peppers is always a good one that you can grow in most regions. Strawberries is another one that you can grow, and strawberries is one of those that's a perennial that can keep coming up every year. Really good, and when you first get that spring harvest, it's really nice. I think that's what you want to consider. There's a lot of greens out there that you can plant. Watermelon's another one that's a good one, and cantaloupe. So I think those are my favorite ones that are traditional that I plant every year. I am trying some new ones, like Ann introduced me to long beans, which I've never seen before. That we've actually tried some of them, and they're not too bad. You just have to pick them at the right time, otherwise they're they are a little chewy, as in sometimes it feels like you gotta keep chewing and chewing or spit that part out, because I noticed that on last one, or it doesn't have enough flavor because it's not ripe enough. So there's some things you still got to figure out on some of the new stuff, but if you learn that stuff, it adds a new variety. I mean, having 2 foot long green beans, that's a lot of food. If you can produce a bunch of that, I mean, that's a lot of nutritious side dishes for your family.
So another thing that you want to remember after you have chosen the right plants to start out in the spring, compost is a must. It manage all your garden waste. That way you're going to improve your soil structure, add nutrients back into the soil. And
this is considered compost right here too. This straw is biodegradable, so at the start of your new growing season, till it into your ground. This stuff here is gold. So is manure, if you can get manure, and leaves, things like that. As long as the leaves don't have seeds on them, it's fantastic. She's got a few other tips here, but yeah, doing your fertilizer and compost, especially compost, is a must, because it loosens the soil and makes it more mendable, and you have a constant flow of non-burning fertilizer for your crops. So one thing that you don't see because you're looking at the above ground is below ground, your leaves, your straw, all that stuff is being devoured by earthworms. Those earthworms leave their, I want to say, their manure and their waste in the ground after they break it all down, and that is some of the richest fertilizer that you can have.
So when you want to feed your soil where you're living, so when they say feed your plants, basically, essentially you are feeding that soil. So by using compost and other types of different things that you can get for the soil, different plants need different types of nutrients. It's a good idea to test the pH level of your soil and see what it might be lacking, or just, you know, go have it tested to see what nutrients may be missing. If you want to test just the pH level, get you a little quart jar, put some soil in it, then fill it up about 3/4 full of water, put the lid on, shake it up real good, get some pH test strips from like a pool and spa place. They're not real expensive. Test the soil and see what your pH level is. Once you know the water and everything and dirt is settled back down, then you can test it, and then you'll know kind of where you're at. Some of your plants need a higher acid level, and then you'll know what types of plant food to put on your soil. So like I said, essentially you are feeding your soil, and that is feeding your plants. So some of your plants need to be fed a couple times a year. So compost is your friend anytime. I mean, anytime you can get a hold of good compost, just about any kind of flower, vegetable, whatever you're growing, they love compost. But some of your other plants, if you can put fish fertilizer on some of, like your cucumber plants, they love fish fertilizer. Some of the other ones, when they're fruiting, the fruit and nut fertilizer is more beneficial to them because they produce more fruit. I mean, there's so many different kinds on the market that you can get. Fall's the best time. Just go in the stores and see what they have on clearance. Pick it up so you have it for next year. It really doesn't matter if you get water soluble or the granular type or whatever, just so you are regularly feeding the soil, because the plants, they need the nutrients in the soil to survive.
Yeah, and so to further piggyback off of that, one of the things that we want to talk about is like blueberries. Blueberries are a must. They have to have a more acidic soil around 4.5, 5. Otherwise they will start dying because they will not be able to pull the nutrients from the soil. So that's one of them. Tomatoes, peppers, like it's slightly acidic. Yeah, every plant requires a different pH level, and a lot of the plants will tell you, a lot of the seed packages will kind of tell you, or you can look it up online. They like a slight acidic soil, peppers, tomatoes. They don't, when I say that, you're talking like 6.5, 6.8, or a 7. A 7 is your neutral, but sometimes they like it slightly more acidic. It adds a little bit more flavor. They pull more nutrients. So every plant's a little different. I don't know as many alkaline plants as I do acidic plants. So it just depends on the temperament of the soil. And then one thing you got to keep in mind that she didn't mention was your soil will leach. So what happens with the leaching of the soil is every time you water, every time, you know, we get a massive rainstorm, when the water goes down in the soil, it's going to pull away some of the acidity, and the other parts of the ground's going to start absorbing it. So the pH level could start rising. Especially also mindful of your water. Like our water in our city is very alkaline. I think it's an 8 or 9 almost, is what they were saying. It's very good on the skin. It really mess with your skin. But the problem is you're adding alkaline water to your acidic, so what is happening is you're raising the pH closer to 7, so you're taking away from your plants. So it's a never-ending balance. So it's good not only to just check it once a year, check it several times if you have specific plants. Well water, I know a lot of people that do well water. That one is almost the perfect. It will not change your acidity levels or anything, but you also want to make sure you kind of test your well water to make sure there isn't something special with that.
And then again, when he says when it rains, it's still going to cause a slight change, so you want to be prepared for that. Make sure that you mulch heavily, control the weeds and the pests. We use straw mulch mostly in the fall. When the leaves start falling, I leave them lay. As a matter of fact, if people rake up leaves, I welcome the leaves, because when a garden bed is done for the year and I'm not planting anything in it, I am going to remove all of the dead plant residue from there. I'm going to put it in my compost pile if it doesn't have any diseases or anything, and break it up into small pieces. I'm going to cover that bed with a big thick layer of leaves, and then I'm going to cover it up with a tarp. That way, when I'm ready in the spring, all I have to do is take my little garden hand tool and work that soil, and it's going to break down and feed my soil naturally, and that's going to save me some money too. And the leaves are going to make my plants do better because of the way they decay naturally. And it's getting back to nature. You think about how the forest and the trees and the different flowers and stuff grow, and nobody's there raking up the leaves in a forest. The leaves are making a blanket on the ground to protect the other plants. And so I thoroughly recommend using leaves, except for like black walnut trees and some of the other trees that do put out a toxic type thing into the soil. Maybe don't use those, but your oak and your maple leaves and some of the other leaves, welcome that stuff in your soil. It's a good thing to put on your garden bed. Another thing you want to do, plant some perennials with your vegetables and vice versa. So if you've got a flower garden, plant a few of your spice plants, your herbs and stuff in there with them. Be mindful, because some of that stuff can become invasive and you may need to put it in bigger pots. We planted a sage plant a few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago.
I planted 2 as an experiment, and over the course of years they kept growing and growing, and they became these massive bushes that overtook just a couple garden beds, and we had to cut it back.
It took over a 4x4 bed.
It's a beautiful bush. If you're wanting something that you can use the leaves on, and you want some that's a perennial to look nice in like your front yard, or even like
attract pollinators.
Yeah, even like some type of mulch area up against your house, you would just want a nice bush there. Sage is a great way to do that. I mean, I was shocked at just how beautiful the sage turns over time, because it'll start getting purple flowers and stuff, which is the seeds. But I haven't noticed them really invasive in that regard. You could collect the seeds, I suppose, but over the course of years I haven't seen it expand. What it does is just keeps growing out. It becomes this bushier and bushier and just keeps growing, and it's fascinating to me that's one. Rosemary is another one that's very beautiful, but it too just balloons out and keeps growing. Thyme is another one that starts small and will start growing outward across your ground. Spearmint, any type of mint family is invasive, you want to control that. I mean, if you want that on the ground, because there's people that grow that on the ground to detract animals and stuff. I've seen it used before.
And a lot of your bugs that are bad pests.
You want to create a controlled area for that, and if it tries to seed, make sure it doesn't spread, which sometimes can be harder said than done. But if you have like just a select area by your house that you want to do mint, that's fine. Just know that you need to block that off, because that thing is just going to keep growing and expand. They're great though. I mean, another one is oregano. Everybody loves oregano. I mean, I don't know anybody that absolutely dislikes oregano. It's a great spice. You dry up. That's another.
Are very pretty.
And they are another one that is an invasive weed almost, where it will just grow out. Another one a lot of people don't know about or don't think about is strawberries. Strawberries, when they really start taking off and they start pumping out runners, they go everywhere. And so that's why I have a raised bed. We have some vertical planters for them, because all those runners will become invasive. Now, the best thing about it is with strawberries, about every, I want to say 2-3 years, I have to relook at the timing of it, but about 2-3 years after you've planted it, so add a year to that, probably 3 or 4 years, your production level on the original plant will start decreasing as far as strawberries. That's why it's good to let some produce runners and take over, because that way every year you've got newborn strawberries, and then if you notice ones that are not really producing anymore, then maybe time to pull those unless they are doing some runners, because you want to replenish your strawberries. Strawberries is one of those that you can feed a lot of people with strawberries very easily if with the right conditions.
Another thing that you need to do as an outdoor gardening tip is keep a watering schedule. Get your plants used to a watering schedule. If you kind of know that you're already going into a year where you've had a drought's not going to end instantly the next year. It doesn't work that way. If you're going out of a drought, you're probably still in that drought when you're following in the spring. So you might as well plan ahead that you're going to need to keep some type of watering schedule. So make sure that you're heavily mulching once those plants start getting up above the ground 2 or 3 inches to where you can get a good layer of mulch down, and then water heavily, and then go to once or twice a week good soaking, and water at the root down at the base of the plant. Don't just water everywhere. Find out where that plant stem is and water there. Be precise with it. Or set up a drip system. It's costly at first, but in the long run it'll save you money. Right now we do everything by hand watering, and
we're looking at getting a drip system maybe next year. One of the problems that we're running into is our lake that they have is almost down to 50%. We haven't seen rain hardly at all the last year. We didn't even see really any snow, so we're in this really severe drought area. One other thing to bring up that Ann was mentioned earlier about compost, this is just remnants of watermelon plant. Didn't die from, it didn't turn yellow and didn't have diseases on it. This is a great example of some you can throw in your compost bin. The worms will break this down back into the soil. It's great. So read up on what plants they recommend you put back in the soil. There's one plant I never recommend putting back in the soil, zucchini and squash. And the reason is simple, because of the vine borers. You can tell when they get into it and you have to pull it, but I would just rather pull the plants no matter what at the end of every life cycle and just throw them away. That may be a waste, but in case there's eggs that haven't hatched on there or something, I'd rather be safe than sorry, because those things are such a horrible parasite that I would rather be safe. So there's certain plants that even I won't put back in the soil at that point, just because of the circumstance. If you don't have vine borers in your area and you notice your zucchini and squash plants aren't being decimated, then you may be safe to put it in the ground. But for us, at least with our trend, it's better not to put it back in the soil. So I just wanted to bring that up because I was thinking about that as we were talking about this.
So another thing, when you're starting out, an outdoor tip is save your cardboard boxes, because those make great weed barriers to put around your plants when you're first planting in your garden bed. You can put those cardboard pieces around your tomato plants and stuff to help the weeds down. It's going to break down when you put your straw mulch and stuff over it. It's not going to hurt anything, but it'll do you some favors by using that cardboard. So just hang on to those cardboard boxes, break them down, and then, you know, set them somewhere where you can store them so you have them, so you can use them on your garden next year.
And sometimes you can talk to a manufacturing plant, or somebody say, hey, if you got any extra cardboard you don't throw away or you don't recycle and stuff, sometimes you can get lucky. All you need is just straight up standard brown cardboard boxes, no paint, no dye on them or anything. And to piggyback off what she's saying there, we use cardboard heavily in our garden to repel weeds. We also put mulch on it, and next year we'll have to get more cardboard and put that on top of some of the older mulch to keep the weeds out, and then we'll cover that with new mulch. And so it does become a repetitive, never-ending cycle. But what you're doing is, in the long run, there is some really bad weeds out there that will come back. Bermuda grass is also considered an invasive weed. It will come back, it grows deep in the ground. So what you want to do is you want to cut that off. So you have to keep that in cardboard. There's the chokeweed. I don't know the exact name of it, where it wraps around your plants and starts choking the bindweed. They start basically literally choking your plants, because they're trying to steal all the sunlight and energy from them. And they're one of the worst god-awful weeds that I've had. Another great way to do that is cardboard heavily. That way, even if it comes up finally, it finds a way through. When you pull that thing, you literally are pulling the whole thing right out. And it's good to do it that way. Even cardboarding, even your raised beds, putting a little bit of cardboard if you're adding new soil and stuff isn't a bad idea. But I would use a lighter cardboard on that, just because you want to use that just as a weed barrier, really, during the winter time. So when you're done with your beds, if you can put some cardboard right on top of it, you're blocking off the seeds from trees and everything else from trying to get in there. That way, when it's time to pull the cardboard back, you can use that somewhere else, and you've got a fresh bed of soil that has not been touched by a lot of invasive species.
So my last tip that I'm going to bring up has to do with raised beds. Use raised beds to grow more food in a small space. And like I said, incorporate your flowers in with your veggies and stuff, because some of your flowers, like your marigolds and your zinnias and your nasturtiums, are actually a great trap crop to deter the pests that are going to go after your vegetables. But also, by using your raised beds to your advantage, you can help incorporate more vertical gardening. And it's pretty easy to do when you got those raised beds growing. Give yourself enough space though when you're doing raised beds.
I'll have a video on that very soon on raised bed gardening.
At least 2 to 3 foot though. 3 foot is awesome if you can do it, because that way if you got to get a wheelbarrow of something down through there, you're not fighting anything. But the last thing you want to do is have that stuff so close together that you're trying to maneuver around like a spider monkey and to get from point A to point B, or reach across something that you're gonna end up hurting your back.
Or falling into stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen if you don't plan on how you're spacing. And the other great thing about raised beds that she didn't include is it keeps a lot of the critters out. So if you have like the taller 3-foot tall ones, rabbits typically ain't gonna jump in there to try to eat your lettuce and spinach and stuff like that. Whereas you may still get the occasional squirrel that jumps in there, but there is ways to deter them with that. There is a video that Aunt is doing on a short that should come out soon. It was about turmeric and cinnamon being deterrents that you can put around as a border to control critters such as squirrels, because they don't like the smell of it. So as they get close, they're like, nope, I'm going the other way. So that's one thing that you can try to do, and they are just basic organic household spices that you get from plants themselves. It's just, so there is ways to counteract things.
But you know, we have a video that I'm going to probably do a remake on, but it's about mistakes that people make when they're doing raised beds, because I want you to have a happy and prosperous garden and be happy with the layout that you do. So when you're doing your raised beds, kind of figure out how you want to do it and switch it up from year to year. If you've planted some perennials in there, it's not really a big deal, because there's a lot of different companion plants that you can plant if you've already got perennials established. Like, I'm not going to move a whole bed of strawberries if I have strawberries growing, but what I can do is some taller plants like pepper plants or eggplants, or something that I know grows fairly straight. I'll plant that in with the strawberries, because it's not going to hurt. It's going to give the strawberries some shade. So essentially it's blocking some of the sun for them. Just don't want to overcrowd it, so they're still getting the sun that they need, because plants need 6 to 8 hours of sun a day, you know, for their survival. So you don't want to choke out all of their sun either. But giving them just that little boost of shade with a taller plant is a good thing. And your beans will crawl right up, you know, your corn plants, pepper plants, like I said, once again, eggplants, any of those, they grow pretty sturdy. Another thing that I want to try next year, because we do have the raised beds, in the smaller raised beds like the 4x4 that are about a foot tall, I'm going to do some arch trellising, because if you plant the indeterminate tomato plants, you can plant them around that trellis and train them to grow up around the trellis, and the fruit will go through and it'll be easier for you to pick. So when you do that, you know, decide what bed you want to plant, like all cherry tomatoes, small pear tomatoes or whatever. Put your small ones all in one bed. Do another one where you've got the larger tomatoes, like we like the burgundies.
Super beefsteak's one of my favorite, because they're great for any type of sandwich. I also wanted to piggyback off some with raised beds. So I did Mary Washington asparagus in one of my raised beds. I don't have any regrets doing that. But if you know your soil is good enough and you have a strip of land that you want, perennial vegetables is a great way to go. When I did mine, I set mine up for that bed because I just didn't really trust my soil back then. Kind of, in some ways, I regret doing that, but I'm staying with it now, because some of your perennials is a long-term investment. So, for example, asparagus, you really can't harvest any of the first year, so you just need to let them take off and grow, and if they drop seeds, that's a bonus for you. Second year, you can take probably 50% of the shoots and you'd be okay, as long as you leave one or two still up and get in sun, because that produces food and supplies back to the mother root. Once you get to the 3rd year and beyond, that's where you can probably harvest more, closer to 70% of the tubers. And asparagus, if you haven't looked in the store, is really expensive. Part of the reason why is because it's time, and if something happened, a disease or something wiped it out, because it takes so long to get asparagus back and operational, you have to kind of plan accordingly. So that's one of those plants that if you know you're staying in your area for a long period of time, or you have no problems if you decide you want to sell your house or move, and you're okay with just leaving it for the new homeowners or renters or whatever, that's one to definitely consider. There's definitely nothing wrong with asparagus. It's easy, you know. I add a little bit of compost here and there, but I let them just do what they do, and it's one of the best vegetables, I think, that you can grill or anything. And it's one of those that's a long-term investment. Grapes is another long-term investment. You have, I think we're on year 3. We had some decent ones this year, but they weren't quite ready, and then the birds got them, which that's a whole other topic. But you know, you have to let them grow for a few years. You can pick the grapes, but you're not going to get a big yield the first several years because they're still growing, they're still developing, and they're always constantly making new plants through the woody areas that used to be the prior year plants. So you know, it's a never growing operation. So there's things to consider when you're using raised beds and you're planting your garden, really.
So to summarize the whole thing, just plan ahead, pick what you want to plant in the spring, make what changes you want to make, you know, plan that stuff out during your winter months when you don't have nothing to do. Kind of draw out some plans, things you might want to change, some stuff that you want to try that you haven't ever grown before. If you want to do some experiments, you know, write those down, put them into play. Like next year, I want to plant a lot more pepper plants in 5-gallon buckets, instead of using a whole raised bed for a lot of the pepper plants, because that way I'll be able to move them around as I need to. So there's so many different things so that you can do different in a garden, but just make that your happy place.
And one thing that I'm going to jump on that too, we're also trying to experiment with more drought resistant plants. So we're going to be trying some plants that may taste awful, that may be okay, that are more desert based plants next year, because of if the trend doesn't change here, we're going to be on even harsher water restrictions come next spring, which means the garden's in danger. Our garden is in severe danger at that point, because you know, we're going to have to figure out new ways to do the gardening, or we may only be able to garden so much in the spring while it's not burning up the soil, and then next thing you know, we're on putting our tomatoes and peppers on life support for 3 months and barely watering and just trying to get by, and then hope for another season like we have now where there's almost no cold in sight. But follow the trends too of the weather. I know it changes, but like for us, it has been worrisome that what next year's going to bring. So when she proposed to me that maybe we need to look more into desert crops, more drought resistant, I'm like, you know, maybe we can try to plant yucca. And it's like, I don't know.
Another thing you need to remember is check out your native plants from state to state, what zone you live in. Go check out what flowers you see in the fields and stuff and growing wild, and find out what flowers you kind of like, and see what is bringing in pollinators and stuff when you're out driving around. Bringing in native plants and incorporating that in your garden or in your front area of your home and stuff. It makes it beautiful, but you know, it also does help with what is drought and heat tolerant and stuff in your area. So, because those plants are made to fit the area that you're living in. So bring in some of those native plants and don't be afraid to experiment. But most important, eat what you grow. And if you can't use all the product that is being produced, share. Give it to your neighbors, your family, your friends. Most people are tickled to death to get something out of a garden. It tastes so good.
Or if people don't want it, learn how to preserve, learn how to can it, learn how to freeze it. There is other alternatives you can do. I know a lot of our ancestors did a lot of their own canning, and you know,
and that stuff keeps for years. You know, Mom
Grandma
and
made
Dad,
her own sauerkraut all the time with the cabbage, or she'd can all her tomatoes. Just there was things you can do, and I mean, even last year when you started getting into it, the gardening again, we still have probably 300 pints of salsa downstairs.
I made a lot of salsa last year.
Yeah.
And I made a lot when it was time to tear the garden down, and I had a lot of green tomatoes. You can only eat so many fried green tomatoes. I mean, they're good,
Yep.
but you know, you can only eat so many of them. So salsa, here we come. Who doesn't like chips and salsa, right?
But you can
You know?
also, with your tomatoes and your peppers and basil and oregano, you can make your own pasta sauce. If you have garlic in your garden, or you know, sometimes you can just buy the already minced up garlic like at Sam's Club or some of those places. If you don't have garlic, which that's one that I'm trying to get to actually work in my garden, I've had a hard time getting it to grow and produce. So,
And that's a fall time where you got to plant it in the fall and you harvest it in the spring.
and so
Usually.
yeah, and so garlic, so you can make your own pasta sauce. So here's a fun fact, and I'm not gonna go too deep into it because I know that sometimes YouTube gets mad at talking about that. High fructose corn syrup is not really good for you. Think of this way: if you can make your own pasta sauce, you can control what goes in your pasta sauce, and it's all natural ingredients that you don't buy in a can. And then yes, it's a little bit of time consuming to take the tomatoes from the garden, take the peppers, and then you have to boil it. I think it's about twice, because first is blanching to get the skin off, then you have to cook it a little longer, then you grind it up, then you boil it to get a lot of the water out, and then you have all your vegetables and your herbs in it, and then you take it and can it, and then some people say you can just use that to seal it. I still say boil the jars, that way you know it seals. Let it cool. You've got pasta sauce for years. And you know what's in your ingredients, which is typically your lemon juice, lime juice, a little bit of salt, and then all the other stuff in it. And guess what? It's way healthier.
So anyway, with all of that in mind, I hope you got something good out of those outdoor tips for your garden today. It's just something we wanted to touch base on. There's so much we could really get into, and we'll do another video where we will talk specifically about nothing but raised beds, because we actually built some of our own raised beds when COVID was so hot and heavy and you couldn't get everything that you wanted to order. So we have some experience even with making our own things, and we built some of our own trellises out of things that we have found. And I love going to garage sales and yard sales and auctions and things like that, because what might be trash to somebody else might be a treasure to me, because I'm thinking outside the box. You got to be creative, but most important, make the garden a place that you are going to enjoy being there, because you're the one that's going to take care of it, and you're the one that's going to reap the benefits. And it should be something that brings you a sense of peace and joy, and something that nobody can destroy those feelings, and you're getting back to nature. Nobody can hurt you. So stay blessed. We appreciate all of you so much. We love your comments. Stay tuned with us. I'll be doing a lot more videos. I have a lot of experience. I mean, yeah, I am getting up there in age. My mom, though, she gardened for years. Both of my mother-in-laws, they gardened and planted flowers and stuff, and great-grandma and grandma both, and then we were farmers too. So there's a lot of experience, and my son spent a lot of time out at the farm, so you know, he got to see both sides of the fence with grandma and grandpa. So there's a lot of knowledge there, and we hope that we are bringing you things that you enjoy watching and listening to, and that you're going to say, Kai Dragon Gardening is gardening with fire. So don't be melancholy.
Let us remain happy.
Exactly.
All right.
High five.
Peace.